Would you believe me if I say what I'm playing right now is just one single chord? It's all because chord is scale. Hi, I'm Kingston. I would like to share this music theory of mine. I call it chord equals scale. It's not something entirely new, but if you search it on Google, you might get something different. The first thing that might show up would be chord scale system. It's more about matching scales with chords, and we use it to improvise or compose. But that's not why I'm talking about this. I'm trying to talk about why chord is actually scales, and how do we use this concept to help us to play chords. But before we get into that, let's talk about voicing. The word voicing is quite similar to the word voice parts. Just like a choir, they have different parts to sing different chords. It's quite common in jazz arrangements that uses SATBs. One of its functions is to change the top notes of the chord or emphasize which one you like. So each of the notes in the chord are its voices. So the voicing is about the vertical order of these notes. Let's use D minor 7 as an example. Starting from the root position, we are going to change it later. Since we don't want to confuse it with other chords, we're going to keep D in the bass. Let's try to move the third to the top. Then we would get this. Let's move again. This time it's fifth. Not only it sounded different, it's also changing the distance between voices. It makes the texture much fuller. Since there's not much rules about distance, you can just go nuts with it, as long as you can play it. In the root position, you can make it sound fuller by making the bass lower. Other than changing its position, you can also repeat certain notes. Then you can emphasize any notes you want. No matter how you voice it, it's still D minor 7, as long as you keep the D in the bass. Other than adding notes to the chord, we could reduce them instead. You can take out anything you don't want. The fifth, for example, then you would be left with 1, 3, and 7. But of course, if we take out too much, we lose its purpose. Jazz musicians never follow the rules. When we play a chord, we always add extensions. Extensions are notes beyond 7th, which are 9th, 11th, 13th. The reason why we call it extension is because it doesn't change the nature of that chord. Just like coloring a drawing, it doesn't change the drawing itself. It doesn't change its nature, you can do whatever. So what is this to do with my theory? When you add all extension in a chord, like this D minor 13th for example, if you make those extensions 1 octave lower, then you realize they are just a scale. Well, what scale is this? You might think it's just white notes. It could be C major. But this scale starts on D. If we play all white notes from D to D, then we get this. A D Dorian. Technically, it's not a scale, it's a mode. Mode exists before major and minor, and they gave birth to the scale. Well, the nitpicking is a bit unnecessary, because we're going to use it as a scale anyway. So now you know D minor 7 and its extension is D Dorian. But what does it mean? It means that we can play any notes in the D Dorian. It still means we're playing D minor 7 and its extension. You will have complete freedom in exploring the world of Dorian. Although we can play any white notes as long as we have the D on the bass, it might not be the best idea to go crazy about it. Sometimes we just need some restraint from this freedom we have, so we can create some meaningful voicings. For example, we could use triads in the white keys, chords in C major in this case. You can see which ones sound good by testing out with the bass. And you can also emphasize those chord tones if you like. If you're familiar with inversions, you could use it as well. Although there's C triad over D, the software recognizes it as D7 sus 2 sus 4. Don't worry, it's not an error. My point is, it doesn't conflict with the chord D minor 7. The next step we can take is using intervals. Since we're just using white notes, we don't need to worry about the major, minor, perfect intervals. We could just call it by its number like the second, third, fourth, fifth. We are simplifying this. Fourths are one of the most common ones. When you have chosen an interval, you could try each of them out like this to see what they have to offer. Let's say you like the fourth. You could try to repeat them to get this quartal harmony, or repeat those fifths to make it a quintal harmony. Why these technical mumbo-jumbo all of a sudden? Well, I was trying to prove this concept helps us to connect with those advanced theory. Even if we don't understand all of them, we might be using it even we don't know it. This D minor 11 voicing, for example, we could use this order of interval to get this pattern, or we could just use the shape of our hands to find that voicing. The reason why we need to know chord its scales, you could just bypass many music theory to get many chord voicings. This voicing, for example, I'm just using the shape of my hand. It just feels natural to do it. I don't have to know the theory behind it. All I need to think about is how do I create texture in chords. It's incredibly useful in modal jazz. The word modal came from mode, so modal jazz are jazz that use modes. One of the features in modal jazz, it doesn't use a lot of chords. One of the most famous examples is the Miles Davis So What. It only consists of two chords, D minor 7 and E flat minor 7, and it stays on a single chord for 16 bars. Check it out if you haven't done already. Whether you like the tune or not, it brings the question of how do we make one chord more interesting, and not to rely on chord changes and complexity. Well, we do have to change chords sometimes, but would you be able to challenge yourself to make the music more interesting without changing much chords? That's the end of part 1. In part 2, we're going to continue the same concepts on different chords and how do we apply this on rhythmic voicings.